context of what we're talking about today, but welcome first of all to this Friday show and tell from LOTI. We are going to be talking today about the digital data and innovation capability model that we've been working to develop with Bloomberg Associates, and very pleased to have Bridget from Bloomberg with us today. And Bloomberg supported our original City Tools project. Some of you may be aware we did some work early on in LOTI's life cycle to improve the way boroughs procure their different technologies and see who uses what. They were keen to work with us again, for which we're very, very grateful. And in this example, what we're trying to do is to understand or help boroughs answer this question: what does good look like on digital, on data and innovation as the fundamental capabilities that boroughs really need to be truly 21st century organisations? We know lots of people talk about these kind of areas in very different language. We know that it's often difficult for CIOs to have informed conversations with their chief financial officers who want to know what's the financial return, and with their chief execs who want to understand the real world impact. And lots of confusion we often see about what job roles and capabilities sit under those three headings. And so we've been very pleased to be able to work not just with Bloomberg Associates, but also with Omid Shiraji, who is currently the Interim Chief Information Officer at OneSource, that covers Newham and Havering. Omid's worked with us on a whole variety of projects, but his expertise, having worked across lots of different public sector organisations and the private sector, is helping to inform this work. Now, Omid is a very busy man and unfortunately couldn't join us here this morning. So instead, he sent us a recording explaining this work to date, this work to create these three capability models. And so I'm going to come out of the slides now, and fingers crossed, I will play his video, at the end of which you do have the LOTI team on the phone. So if there are questions that you would have put to Omid, we'll be very, very happy to take them. But for now, let me play the video.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining me today at this LOTI show and tell, where I'll be providing an update on the digital data and innovation reference model work. I'm really sorry I can't be with you in person to answer any questions, but feel free to ask any of the LOTI team or ping me directly, and I'll definitely come back to you. I'm going to start by showing you a pre-recorded primer that just explains the problem statement and frames the context for the work. You'll then see a sort of concept model of what we were trying to achieve, and then I'll spend a few minutes actually showing you where we are in terms of the live model, and then I'll take you through next steps. Thank you for your time.
Our starting point is that every organizational leader looks at the role of digital data and innovation through a slightly different lens. The challenge for us is that in organizations, particularly local authorities in the UK, the capabilities and the professions surrounding innovation data and digital are quite immature, especially compared with others like HR, finance, or legal. Indeed, if you recruit a chief finance officer or a finance director, they've got standard bodies who have articulated the stuff that finance needs to do within an organization. Everything from accounting to internal auditing and much more. And they've also helped shape what the specific roles and expectations of those roles look like to deliver on that finance stuff. However, when you recruit these senior roles in technology, digital, innovation, or data, what are the standards by which the stuff under these elements are delivered to? How do you know what the roles are? How do you know what the actual technology requirements are? Where do you go? And that's what this work is trying to help unpick. This is an example of the digital model. Now, this model has brought together IT elements and digital, and we've used references from the UK government Digital Data and Technology Framework, the Skills Framework for the Information Age, ITIL version 4, and my own models that I've used in organizations that I've worked as CIO for. And I've grouped the capabilities under these 7 domains. As a pointer, most of what people call digital sits under the design grouping in this model. Now, it doesn't matter about the groupings, everything's subject to change, but this is just a starting point to try to make sure that we capture everything. For example, every one of these will have a definition associated with it. And here you can see, for example, in design, we've got things like user research or product management. These are capabilities that people tend to associate with that phrase digital. As an outcome of this product, we'd like to get into detail. So for example, again, clicking on design and user research, we want to have a clear definition about what that means for your organization. We want to have examples of the activity that you're doing user research and the technology that underpins it. These are the kind of things that your organization might invest in. What are those roles that you need under that capability? And what are the skills? This is taken from the government DDAC framework. And the really hard thing that we're after is what's the impact? So by having user research in your organization, what do you get out of it? Can we start to evidence that? Here are some examples about what we might be able to do with the model as comparative analysis or benchmarking. So for example, an organization might be able to look at how many staff it has and what the investment they might need to put into it. And actually you can then use the model to aggregate up. So for example, in this model, what percentage of jobs are in each of these domains for a borough? We now have a common framework and a common language by which to make that comparison. We can do the same with investment as another example of how this might be used.
So that was the concept. So I'm now going to show you the prototype. As you can see here, although this is split at the moment into data and digital and innovation, what you can see here is a list of the capabilities organized by category or domain. So under the digital model, you can see, for example, under design are the elements that you might ordinarily think of the word digital encompassing. Here you can see data, and you can see all of the different components of that, from culture through to the foundations through to the really advanced capabilities that we want to see through data. This is innovation. So a lot of these capabilities, local authorities and public sector organizations tend not to have. By clicking here, you can see a variety of roles. So these are the roles at the moment that have been taken from the government DDAC framework. And if you were to click on one of them, if you were to click on business analyst, for example, you can see which part of the model a business analyst would work in. And then if you were to click here, it would take you to the website which shows the job requirements, job description, roles and skills. And the final thing I'm going to show you is an example of that sort of aggregate view. So here, as an example, if I click design and then business analysis, you can see the definition of what we mean by that. You can see what roles are required to do business analysis. And then here you can see an example of how much a borough may spend on that capability, what the average number of employees it might employ. And clicking here, you can see what other capabilities a business analyst role may contribute to and under what domains. So if you're building teams in those capabilities, you need to make sure there's a business analyst in there. So what's next? Well, we're spending some effort trying to collect the data points to fill in the detail underneath each of these capabilities. So I showed you an example of sort of FTE and spend, but we're also trying to collect data about what's the technology that boroughs use under each one of these things, and most importantly, so what's the benefits or outcomes that we can achieve by having these capabilities. We're also working with partners to develop this rather amateurish prototype into some kind of minimum viable product, an information product that can be used by all boroughs. Now, we set this up specifically so the domains were separate, digital data and innovation. But of course, in reality, that's not true. They're really interlinked, and elements of those capabilities spread across teams that might do these three things differently. So the challenge that we have is to find a way to bring this model together into almost a single, maybe Venn diagram, rather than separate models right now. And then finally, we're looking to iterate. So we've got over 90 sort of separate capabilities across the three models with definitions of each, and hopefully we're collecting data points around each of those elements, but we need to iterate. And so that involves working with our community, looking at different ways of collecting data through crowdsourcing or coming together with sort of accelerated workshopping. And we'll also be looking at working much more widely with our partner ecosystem. So the ambition here is to have something released in May time, ideally earlier. As you can see, the model's come along quite nicely, with real data and hopefully for tangible and real benefit. So that brings to the end of this show and tell. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll be happy for you to ask really hard questions to the LOTI team because I'm not here to answer them. Take care, everybody. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
So at this stage, would really warmly invite, if there's any questions at all about what we've just heard from Omid, please do ask. Do you want to raise your hand, and then we can take any queries that you might have. Let's have a look. Who have we got? Toby.
It's more an observation rather than a question. And thanks very much for for sharing that. I work for an SME that sort of engages with local authorities to help deliver better curbside management. So the use of I'm trying to think parking and also commercial freight. This would be a really useful tool for me, because obviously trying to engage with the right person when you're trying to introduce a new digital way of operating an existing asset and trying to provide a revenue positive experience for local authorities, as well as benefits to commercial freight operators. It's always very difficult whether I'm sort of going there talking to the parking person, the highways person, the environment, the directorate, etc. So this would actually be a very helpful tool for someone like me to have access to be able to look at that and say, right, okay, so in this particular borough you've got these sorts of job sets. So it allows you to have some of those conversations, so you can get an internal sponsor who understands the data, the innovation, the future way of doing something, rather than having to approach someone who may be more service oriented, they're stuck in their ways a little bit, for good reason, because they're delivering on the front line. So just an observation that is a very welcome tool to see being developed. So thank you.
That's good to hear, and I think in part we recognise the point. It can be very difficult for those outside of local government trying to figure out who is it to talk to, and in part because we call very similar things very different. They've got different titles in different boroughs, so part of this at least is trying to come up with a common language for talking about this, which we certainly hope will be benefit not just for the sector, but as you say, for those trying to serve it as well. Thank you for sharing that. Edward, then David, then Nicola. Edward first.
Sure. So a couple of little questions. So obviously that's quite focused on the individual roles themselves. I'm curious about how that sort of meshes together into a team, and what sort of approaches you're looking to use or advising your councils to use when actually getting a new product, digital product or digital service from the inception stage to launch and into delivery. And then alongside that is a little question on how, obviously you've got the costs and the general sort of costs laid out in there, but the approach to measuring ROI on particular council or borough's investment in that kind of a role or creating a digital service.
Those are great questions. And so I guess the first thing to say on the team's question is that we do recognise that different boroughs are organisationally set up in very different ways. And so in the first instance, so for the first version of this model, we're not trying to say, here is your ideal org structure. We're instead trying to say, look, you know, you decide what's the right org structure internally for you and your needs and your stage of evolution and maturity. But these are the capabilities that you need to have, or here's what those capabilities can actually produce, here's the real world impact they might provide. Because we find different boroughs at different stages of their sort of digital transformation journey. Some are wanting to understand, okay, if we could only do one thing, what's the best place to invest? And maybe we'll incorporate it within our existing team. Others might want to sort of start from scratch and be looking at whole new types of function. Others will be trying to sort of audit what they've currently got and spot gaps. So I think a natural evolution of this may well be for boroughs to start sharing a lot more knowledge about saying, okay, we agree these are the right capabilities. This is how we structure it in a team form. Here's how we do it. But for now, at least that varies. So I think that would be a second phase, but an important one to come to. On the ROI point, it's the perennial question, a really important question. It's why, in part, we're so keen to try and capture some of the real world outcomes that having specific capabilities enables you to do. Because often we get this sort of viciously circular conversation between CIOs and, say, the chief finance officer going, you know, we want to invest in this area, and the finance officer saying, well, you know, what is it? What's that unlocking that we can't currently do? And in part, we need to create the common language for them to do that. In part, we need to complement it with our work on innovation and procurement, where we're trying to get much more granular information about who is spending what on which specific technologies. It is really difficult sometimes to pin that down to ROI specifically, but we hope by talking about the types of tech they need alongside the skills to deliver certain capabilities, boroughs will be able to make much more informed conversations. But I recognise, I think what's behind your point, and I think we'll try and sort of get more and more sophisticated with how we talk about that in later versions.
I think it's a natural evolution, isn't it? So I just wanted to make the last point. It was very interesting what you were saying. I think it's also important with obviously there's a varying sort of digital maturity, as you've said, within organisations. And you know, when you're having those conversations, I think going to the CFO from someone within digital or tech side of the business, if particularly in a less mature organisation, I think that the sort of tendency is to I guess try be too ambitious with what you're investing, which ends up being more expensive in the long run, because then you have to spend much more money on fixing, and fixing is far more expensive than doing it properly in the first place. So I just think that's an interesting thing. So I think this is great stuff for you to be able to get across to all your councils and boroughs.
Thank you for your comments. Let's come now to David.
So thanks very much for making this available. It's really good. I'm just conscious that there's a relatively few number of people on this call, and there's a much larger community out there, both on the local government digital Slack, but also just purely on Twitter. And I'm just wondering whether these videos and the information about this can be shared to get more feedback from more people.
Absolutely. Onyeka, did you want to say anything on that front?
Yeah, just to say that we'll definitely be sharing these videos on our socials, so on our LinkedIn and Twitter pages. We'll also make it available on the project page, so it should be easily accessible and referenceable for anyone who wants to share it on other platforms. And yeah, we're happy to share it on Slack as well.
Cool, thank you.
Final bit just to add, once we do have like a full functioning sort of MVP version of the tool, I think we'll be happy to share it and invite feedback, you know, really granular feedback from the wider community. So that will be another specific opportunity we'll be keen to follow up on. Thanks for your support on that, David. Nicola.
Hiya. Yeah, it was just a question really about really good to kind of see in terms of what you're doing in that space. I just wondered how far, I guess, your engagement was going, because I think that again, we've been in similar conversations with other authorities where people do want to benchmark themselves around, you know, kind of size of workforce and FTE and types of roles that are going into different types of teams. So I just wondered how far your engagement was going kind of outside the London area, if at all. And obviously just a reflection that in our organisation recently, we were looking at the different job profiles for analysts, and I think there was like 44 different job profiles for analysts. And, you know, really great to see that actually this is a way of really trying to define what we mean in terms of what we want and the skills and the capabilities. So look forward to that coming.
Definitely, and I think we'll be keen to share it with the wider sector. You know, everything we do at LOTI is certainly for LOTI boroughs. It's most certainly for all London boroughs, but I think this kind of tool has huge applicability right across the UK. And in part, you mentioned, yes, the proliferation of completely different job descriptions, and so we hope a key part of this will be building up more of a common library of those roles. Just so that actually there's sort of, it's much easier for talented people who haven't previously worked in local government to start to make a bit more sense about what a career opportunity might look like within the sector. But certainly, as I said, once we've got the MVP model sort of nailed in a way that we can receive coherent feedback about it, we'll be very keen to push that out to the sector to see what people think, and we'll iterate, adapt it and improve it as we go.
Cool.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your comments. Any final questions? Onyeka has shared our project page on the LOTI website, loti.london. Please do check that out for all our latest information, and also obviously on social media we keep you up to date alongside our week notes. Just to say, if you're available this time next week, do join us again to talk about the work that we're doing on cyber resilience for smart cities and IoT, helping boroughs understand how do they insulate themselves from the cybersecurity risks of smart city and public realm tech. Should be a really interesting session, so do return if you're interested in that theme. For now though, thanks for your time, have very good Fridays, and hope to see you all again soon. Bye for now.
Thank you.